I have several heroes in my life, but few are bigger than my father. Today he turned 75, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about this wonderful man. Fred Jr. was a sanitation man for 23 years here in New York City and worked very hard his whole life. Right after he graduated high school, he enrolled in the Navy when he was only 17, and during the Korean War yet. He got to see a good part of the world before he even turned 21, and loved every minute of it. He fixed airplanes on board an aircraft carrier, and he and his friends were very creative. One day they were dying from the heat out in the South Pacific, and there were no soda machines on board ship back in the early 50s. So they got the bright idea of using a hollowed out bombshell for a useful purpose. They lined it with some kind of wrapping and filled it up with warm tap water. They then put it in a bomb compartment under the plane. When the pilot took off for his daily maneuvers, he flew about 30,000 feet in the air where it gets very cold. When he landed back on the ship, my father and his friends had ice-cold water to drink. Their lieutenant caught them, but looked the other way after telling them no more stunts. My father was always trying stunts when he was younger. When he was 6 years old, they didn't have kindergarten, so you started school in the first grade. As smart as my father is, he didn't want to go to school at first. So he would put a death grip on the iron fence outside his school, and my grandmother would try and pull him off. This was during the height of the Depression, and all the time he's screaming, "No, Ma, we can't afford to send me to school. We can't afford it. We're on relief." My grandmother was very proud, and at that point wished the ground would just open up and swallow her. But my father was a very good son, and always took care of his parents and the rest of his family. Unfortunately, on the first Christmas after I was born, me, my father, mother, and all my relatives were at my grandparents' when it started snowing. And my father's boss somehow found him and rang the bell, telling him he would have to leave and work Christmas night because they needed to plow the snow. Because I was always scared of this happening again, I was the only kid in school I knew who hoped we never had a white Christmas as long as my father was a sanitation man. And I have to say, during my entire childhood, we never really did have a white Christmas. But my father was used to the snow. When I was 11 years old, I was in the Boy Scouts, and we had to go on a camping trip in the middle of January up in a freezing area called Sonita Hills. The snow was pretty deep, and snowed on the night we drove up there. It was 10 degrees, and we stayed in a log cabin, but about 25 feet away from the fireplace. The only reason me and the rest of the boys probably didn't die that night was because of my father. Our scoutmaster was supposed to be an experienced camper, but he didn't have a clue. And through that whole freezing weekend, my father never complained once, even though he hated camping, even in warm temperatures. Still, we had a great time enjoying the weekend alone together. It was the only time we ever did that. I remember us driving home Sunday, and before we got home, he made sure we went to church, even though we stunk like wood smoke. He was also my physical hero. He saved me from a number of big messes, but one day he was particularly heroic. When I was about 8, my little brother, sister, and I were walking home from school when a big kid I'll call Vito started harassing us. He was about 15, and I knew him from the neighborhood, but why he started in with us that day I don't remember. All I know is that he started chasing us, and to get away we ran across the street without looking first, and the car that almost ran over me and my sister turned out to be my father's. He stopped short and wondered what we were running from. We got in the car and told him. He got mad and started driving around the neighborhood, but we couldn't find Vito. We got home and told my mother what happened, changed our clothes, and drove to the supermarket for our weekly shopping. When my father turned down the same street he always used to avoid the traffic light, who was standing in front of his house but Vito? My father stopped short, jumped out of the car screaming, "You come here!" Vito was big, but my father was bigger, 6'3" and 280 pounds, and crazy strong. When we were kids, my father could tear our yellow pages in half. He has forearms like Popeye. Vito ran right into his open basement door, and my father ran in right after him. My mother was in the front seat, petrified of what my father was going to do, and the engine was still running while we sat in the middle of the street. My father chased Vito through the basement, up the stairs, and into his mother's kitchen. You can imagine this lady's fright. When my father explained the situation to her, she marched Vito outside and had him apologize to all of us. My father was like a goddamn lion that day. I saw him like that only about 10 times in my life, but it was always awe-inspiring for me and my brother, and admittedly a little scary. But then there were the days when the lion turned on us. Like one time I had an acoustic guitar that I never learned how to play. When you can't play a guitar, it can also become a useful bat. So my brother and I took turns smashing it against the basement pillar that held up the house. This made a hell of a racket. Finally, my father had enough. He came running downstairs screaming, "What the hell are you goddamn idiots doing? You're knocking the house down." When I see kids argue with their fathers, I'm shocked, because my father told me to do something once, and I wasn't stupid enough to argue the point. He also had a great whistle. We could literally be 2 blocks away, but we'd hear my father's whistle calling us home, which seemed much cooler than my friends' moms who merely screamed their names in the street. What I love most now is going on adventures with my dad to things like ball games and movies. The first Met game he ever went to was with me on Father's Day in 1990. It was one of the most exciting games I ever saw. The Mets beat the Dodgers 10-9 in the bottom of the ninth on a 2-run double and knocked in by Tim Tuffle. We had such a great day that afternoon. I didn't have the heart to tell him that few baseball games were ever that exciting, but what fun we had. My father taught me a lot, but he mostly taught me you can love with an open heart and still be a strong man. I love him so much. Happy birthday, Chubb.